Let's start with a story. Kira was 10 years old when she stopped answering questions in class. She used to love school. Her small hand would shoot up in the air before her teacher even finished asking something. But that was in her old school, where she was encouraged to talk about dreaming stories in class. Kira was a proud Yolngu girl who had since moved from Arnhem Land to Darwin for her mother's health treatment. Now in Year 4 at the local public school, Kira sits in the back row, eyes down. Her new teacher, Mr. Stewart, thinks her stories are silly. He corrects the way she talks. He doesn't seem to care when the other kids laugh at her when she struggles to read some English words. Back in Arnhem Land, Kira's grandmother told her where she came from. Kira loved hearing about her mob's history. She always answered Kira's questions and spent time showing her how to live off the land, paint, and make things. Her grandmother always told her how clever she was. But now, that knowledge didn't seem to matter because no one asked her about her country. One day, an auntie from the local Aboriginal Education Office came to visit Kira's school in Darwin. She brought in ochre paints and asked the Indigenous students to create a story circle. For the first time in months, Kira's eyes lit up. She told a story, not with words, but through dots and symbols. Her painting outlined her journey from Arnhem Land to her Year 4 classroom and all the feelings buried deep inside. Auntie listened, and then she talked to Mr. Stewart. Slowly, the classroom began to shift. Kira was invited to share dreaming stories with her class. Mr. Stewart started using terms like mob and yarning circle. He had Auntie come once a month and teach the whole class some Aboriginal history, dances, paintings, and language. The other students grew to love their lessons with Auntie. Eventually, Kira started answering questions in class again. Unfortunately, Kira's experience prior to the visit from Auntie is not uncommon. Educational disadvantage among the Indigenous community continues to be an ongoing and complex issue within contemporary Australian society. Despite numerous task forces and policies dedicated to improving the education of Indigenous students and a broad shift toward inclusive education across Australia, many indicators still reflect significant inequality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous education outcomes. As documented in the Closing the Gap reports, while there have been some encouraging improvements, such as Year 12 completion rates, numeracy and literacy levels continue to lag behind national averages. School attendance remains significantly lower among First Nations students. As teachers and professionals, we must therefore ask the burning questions: why does this gap exist, and what can we do as teachers and educators to empower children like Kira reach their full learning potential? Firstly, why does this gap exist? Well, Indigenous Australians are part of an ancient civilization with a profoundly strong cultural heritage. Despite there being over 250 mobs representing a diverse people group, Indigenous Australians share deep-rooted commonalities. Their cultural worldview encompasses a strong oral storytelling tradition, a deep connection to the dreaming in the country, and respect for elders and their family identity. Key social interactions among Indigenous communities play an essential role in themes of connectedness and kinship. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been successfully living and moving across the land using dreaming tracks and song lines for millennia. Wisdom passed down by elders over many generations ensures intimate knowledge of human life in harmony with nature. This connection with land profoundly influences the process of learning as everything speaks, the wind, the rain, and it sings. The impact of colonization in the 18th century has caused significant marginalization, cultural dislocation, and disruption of traditional learning practices. Years of undervaluing the indigenous knowledge systems alongside systemic racism has contributed to entrenched cycles of disadvantage. The human tragedy of forcibly removing children from their families and country has caused immeasurable grief. Strong familial bonds were forcibly broken and children were not allowed to speak their own languages, cutting all ties with their culture. For First Nations people, the loss of so many essential components of their social and cultural identity has been devastating. This history of trauma continues to impact trust in educational institutions. The personal experience of discrimination and racism among parents and grandparents can limit their capacity to support the next generation's educational pursuits. Well, if fundamental differences in culture, along with the impact of colonization, is not enough to cause a gap in educational outcomes, then the mismatch between traditional and Western methods of learning has also played a significant role in making that gap a whole lot bigger. For generations, mainstream Australian education has prioritised Western knowledge and practices, frequently overlooking Indigenous history, culture, and languages. Within the school system, there has been a lack of culturally responsive pedagogy. Formal education is viewed by many Indigenous people as an attempt to remake them culturally and socioeconomically into closer replications of their colonising counterparts. For Kira, moving to a new city meant learning a new language. For many Indigenous students, their community dialect or Aboriginal English is their primary language. Thus, learning at school can be very difficult and can often present as misdiagnosed learning difficulties. So, let's now return to our second big question. What can we do as teachers and educators to empower children like Kira reach their full learning potential? Australian schools have the opportunity to become a means of cultural connection and healing for Indigenous students. Schools are not simply places of academia, but have an important role in shaping values of cultural identity, respect, and community integration. When a child's identity is affirmed, they are more motivated to learn and participate in classroom activities. As in Kira's experience, an informed and culturally sensitive teacher can make all the difference between a child withdrawing or thriving at school. Schools also have a pivotal role in building strong relationships with families and communities. Schools that involve local elders, leaders, and Aboriginal education officers and participate in NAIDOC and other cultural activities move towards overcoming the years of historical trauma and racism. Many education policies, targets, and programs in the past were developed with little consultation with Indigenous communities. Indigenous educators and scholars are challenging this approach and are increasingly advocating for solutions led by their own people. There are a growing number of programs and teaching strategies aimed to help educators provide optimal learning environments for Indigenous students. The Australian Indigenous Education Foundation is a valuable resource for teachers seeking to understand and incorporate cultural methods of learning. Programs like the Connected Beginnings provide a service in preparing the school readiness of young Indigenous children. The Walking Together, Working Together Partnership Agreement and the Turning Policy into Action initiative emphasise working alongside Aboriginal education groups to create curriculum that aligns with Indigenous traditions and culture. Utilising the 8 Ways framework helps modern-day teachers apply curriculum within the context of Aboriginal pedagogy. Teachers can also develop their skills in creating more inclusive classrooms that encourage linguistic diversity by adapting literacy instruction and assessment as appropriate. Considering traditional language is a key to cultural identity, then the recognition of other dialects is important for building confidence and acceptance. This forms a strong base for future literacy development. Two-way learning presents a useful method of bridging the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous learning systems by supporting students to develop standard English skills through culturally respectful pedagogy. Like Kira, I have seen many children from families who've had to relocate to urban centres for health-related reasons. My own family lived in Darwin for 18 months while my husband, a renal dialysis nurse, was fortunate to work both in Darwin and the Tiwi Islands. He witnessed firsthand the value of providing dialysis services on Bathurst Island, which allowed patients to largely remain within their island communities. This benefits their children, who can remain connected to their culture and attend local schools. Tiwi College, for example, is uniquely owned and governed by the Tiwi people through the Tiwi Education Board, made up of respected senior men and women from across the Tiwi communities. In contrast, we also met families who had moved to Darwin from remote areas for long-term dialysis treatment. Many of these children became disengaged and deeply affected by being disconnected from their own communities and cultural roots. These experiences reinforced to me the importance of keeping Indigenous children connected to their culture for their well-being and educational engagement, especially when they have relocated. Now, back to Kira. It only took a little understanding and a shift in mindset for her teacher, Mr. Stewart, to create a classroom environment that radically altered the educational experience of Kira. Her ensuing education and thus her future life course were at crossroads in Year 4. Kira was slowly becoming disengaged, negative towards school, feeling unheard and undervalued. Her identity as a proud Aboriginal girl was slowly eroding. The noticeable change in Kira's classroom towards appreciating Australia's First Nations people and welcoming their deep knowledge of country was a key moment in the future trajectory of this young Indigenous girl. Teachers, educators, regardless of where you are located, you play a crucial role in supporting Indigenous students by embedding cultural understanding and learning experiences into classroom activities and pedagogy that affirms their identities and provides the best possible opportunities for achieving positive educational outcomes.